Where's my shadow? Which one will where's my shadow? That's who I should.
Yeah, well, I could use this. I actually concept about the real side hospital, so I'm still teaching it. But, I kind of miss it. Are they receiving people right now? Yeah, they're asking for a match. You got so
Please use the side aisle, the families on the front. You can please use the side aisle, family on the front. aisle, the family's in the front.
Yeah, we're safe with that.
Well, if you would like to see the family before
No,
service.
let's go ahead. Thank you.
You could please use the side aisle, the family's in the front.
Everyone, we're about to begin services.
If I can ask the immediate family to please rise, so everyone's sitting in the front row table. Sure you will. So before we begin our service this afternoon, we're first going to perform a ritual called Kriya, which means to tear. And we perform this ritual called Kriya as we know that there's been a tear created in our lives through Marvin's loss, a tear that can never be fully mended. We understand that we must move forward, and we do so together, standing together in our attempt to both honor his life and to begin to repair that tear. So I'll ask that you repeat the blessing after me, and then we will create a tear from the ribbons that you're wearing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Dayan Amen. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who judges in truth. And as we've learned from the book of Job, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, v'hi Shem Adonai mevorach. God has given and God has taken away. But we thank God for all the years in between. You can tear the ribbons.
We're going to see different services. Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services, if we can please kindly turn off all cell phones or electronic devices, or please place them on silent. Thank you.
Kirachem av al banim recham Adonai al yireyav. As a parent has compassion for their children, Adonai has compassion for those who show reverence. God knows how we are fashioned. God remembers that we are dust. The days of mortals are like grass. We flourish as the flowers of the field. A wind passes over us and we are no more. But Adonai's compassion is everlasting. God's kindness to children's children endures age after age, unchanging. Gathered together this afternoon to honor the memory of Marvin Ames. In this moment, as we seek words of comfort, we also turn to the words, the ancient words of our tradition, just as our ancestors have done for so many generations before us, as we turn to the words of Psalms.
In the English, I turn my eyes to the mountains, from where will my help come? My help comes from God, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your protection, a guardian at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all evil and guard your soul. God guards your going and coming, now and forever.
Mizmor LaDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binodesh yargitzeni, amen nuchot yinahaleni, nafshi yeshovev, yancheni b'magvei tzedek l'man shema, gam ki elech b'geit salmavet, lo yirara ki ata imadi, shivtecha u'mishantecha hema yenachamuni, taroch lefanai shulchan neged sodarai, teshanta b'shemen roshi kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yerdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai, la'orech yami. Those were the Hebrew words of Psalm 23. I'll ask that we turn to the English translation of Psalm 23 together as we recite. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As I'll share a little later, we're currently reading from the fourth book of the Torah, the book of Numbers. But it's already in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Torah, that we see the tradition start that when we lose a loved one, when a family loses a loved one, it's family members that step forward to offer words of eulogy, words of remembrance. And that's exactly what we will do now, as we're going to be hearing from both of Marvin's daughters, first Julie and then Alyssa, and then one of his grandsons, David. So Julie, come on.
Thank you for coming and for your support during this difficult time. I'd like to share a few memories of my father. When I was a very young child and didn't want to go to sleep at night, my father would lay on the floor of my room until I fell asleep. Then he would sneak out so he wouldn't wake me, or else he would have to spend the rest of the night on the floor. Now, while I really don't remember that, my mother told that many times, and she told it to my daughter Ashley too, and she reminded me about that. As a child, he played games with me. One game was Hide the Thing, although I don't remember what the thing was. He also played board games with me, like the dating game, and didn't seem to mind when he got the dud. During Christmas vacation, he took me on the train to his office in New York City. I remember him giving me donuts and thinking that his job was to eat donuts. My father was a quiet man who had trouble getting a word in while living in a household filled with 3 women. I had the chance to see the outgoing side of him when he took me to a business event because my mother had to go out of town. He was also very social when my in-laws from Chicago visited and enjoyed sharing stories with them about cruising. They all like to go on cruises. Even though my parents had just moved to New Jersey and my father had just started a new job, he threw us a beautiful wedding and lent us his brand new car so we could go on our honeymoon. My father came to Chicago when his first grandchild, Brian, was born. When we relocated to New Jersey, he let us live in his home until we bought our townhouse. It couldn't have been easy for him to go from being an empty nester to having 2 little children around all the time. My father enjoyed playing tennis and took great pleasure whenever he would beat my husband, Bob. He wanted to show him how the pros played it, so we took both his sons-in-laws to see a tennis tournament featuring Pete Sampras. My father also had a very unique sense of humor. He liked to make up nicknames for people, such as calling his brother-in-law Earl the Pearl. Earl the Pearl was a basketball player, and his daughter's college boyfriend, the Vance, because he was so short. I'm glad my father could attend his grandchildren, Brian and Ashley's college graduations, and could celebrate afterwards with us and my in-laws in Atlantic City and Delaware. And I'm glad my father had the chance to see his granddaughter Ashley get married, dance at her wedding, and say one of the blessings. He got to know my son-in-law Ryan when they visited us and told Ryan stories about working at Whitman's Chocolates and going to college at Cooper Union. And I'm grateful he was able to meet his adorable great-granddaughters, Kayla and Kelsey. He would smile at them when he saw them and enjoyed seeing their photos and videos. It is very sad that my father's health, the pandemic, and other factors made his last few years so difficult. And now he can finally rest in peace and be reunited with Missy, Ruffles, and the other beagles he loves so much. Goodbye, Daddy.
Alyssa.
Too much to say in just 5 minutes. Daddy is a complex man, a high-powered corporate executive, a family man who instills in us values of generosity and helping out when needed, both with time and money, a strong work ethic, values including love of family, Judaism, Jewish culture, beagles, food, travel, in which Dad studied languages, including Portuguese, to prepare for my parents' world trips, dance in which Dad built a wooden dance floor in the basement to practice ballroom dance lessons with Mom, and sports. I vividly remember watching Daddy play basketball with Papa, when Papa fell and broke his wrist, so we rushed him to the hospital. I enjoyed attending U.S. Opens with my parents in New York and watching Dad play tennis locally, amazing his opponents by playing with no backhand. Being ambidextrous, he switched hands instead. A dedicated tennis player heading to Cherry Hill Racket Club at 4 a.m., I once arrived home the same time from a date. Daddy yelled at the guy who I never saw again. The proverbial wandering Jew, 6 states that Dad has lived and worked in. New York. Dad was born in Brooklyn, Mom too. His first job was as a civil engineer for Howard Needles Engineering, designing bridges. We moved to our first house in South Belmore, Long Island. I have memories of going out to eat at DeAntonia's Pizza, Kwaming, Winston Steak Pub, the Big Bow Wow, weekly visits to grandparents in Brooklyn, gatherings with extended family for Jewish holidays, standing with the women in the back of the Brooklyn shul while the men prayed up front. Summers crossing the Rockaway Bridge, ha ha hee hee, the song we sang in the car. Daddy rolling up his pants legs, carrying me through flooded waters in Rockaway during hurricanes, visiting animals at Lollipop Farm, planning to buy shrubs at the City of Glass, but ending up with our first beagle, Missy, instead. Daddy then worked for Sinclair Oil and got into operations research. I fondly recall visits to the Sinclair building at Rockefeller Center, seeing the wall-to-wall, reel-to-reel computer tapes, Daddy making us large printouts of Snoopy, a beagle of course, on green and white computer paper. The next state was Virginia. Dad served in the armed forces for 2 years, and my sister Julie was born. Then back to New York, and I was born. And Dad served for 6 years in the Army Reserves. When Sinclair merged with Arco, Dad switched jobs to Borden's to avoid a move. Ohio. A move was inevitable as Borden's moved most operations out of New York in 1971, and our wanderings with Dad took us to Columbus, Ohio, where he became VP of Borden's Waltex Columbus Coated Fabrics, and we joined our first temple. Wisconsin. Dad's transfer to become vice president of Borden Cheese took us to Thiensville, Wisconsin, a suburb outside of Milwaukee, and to a new synagogue. Pennsylvania. Dad became VP of Whitman Chocolates in Philadelphia. As VP of manufacturing at all these companies, Dad took us on tours at each factory. I was fascinated how the machines with rolls of wallpaper coming down got cut at Waltex Columbus Coated Fabrics, operating the same as machines with rolls of cheese coming down at Borden Cheese. Unfortunately, Whitman Chocolates was the only factory that didn't tour with running operations, so we didn't get to see if chocolate flowed the same way. New Jersey. Corporate life brought us to New Jersey, back east, though not quite New York, where Mom felt we always belonged after enduring the culture shock of the Midwest. Now we would be closer to Brooklyn, New York family. My parents settled across the river from Dad's Philadelphia job to be in the Jewish area of Cherry Hill at their home in Fox Hollow, where they have lived for over 42 years, around the corner from TBS, joining my family for high holidays at TBS once Philip enrolled in TBS Hebrew School. After many of our years of continued wanderings, all the proverbial wandering Jews, through a variety of synagogues in South Jersey, we were always together. Now back to my countdown, I'm at number 5. It's been 5 years since Dad fell in the lobby of Penn Medicine in Cherry Hill when he broke the tuberosity of the top of his left shoulder. I thank Dad's medical providers, especially primary care physician Dr. Wheeler Maxwell, and the numerous specialists and rehab therapists who have helped us on this journey to take care of Dad since then. I also thank friends and family for moral support, especially my dear friend Debbie Kolodner for her help during Arden courts and recent rehabs. 4. It's been 4 years that Senior Friends has assisted with Dad's care at home. Thanks for hanging in there with us, and thanks to the tens of 20s of 50s home health aides. Not only do Mary, Nancy, and Linda schedule aides and last-minute subs, but they provided much moral support and shoulders to cry on through the past 4 years. Number 3. It's been my 3 kids, learning from their grandpa to be generous with their money, time, and abilities, helping me and Grandma with his care, ordering and setting up his medicines and supplies, especially Philip and Jocelyn explaining medical details to me and Grandma as we navigate his medical providers and care, and David assisting with technology, including setting up laptop video telemed visits for care at home. Number 2, it's been my 2 wonderful parents, Mom and Dad, together as husband and wife for almost 68 years. Mom always says they have a 50-50 partnership. Dad makes the money and Mom spends the money. Mom adds that Dad's a good person, always does the right thing, generous, helpful to all, a real mensch we all love. And she added another note that I will say when we were saying our goodbyes to Dad earlier. She said he picked him out because he was a handsome man and she didn't want to have ugly children. She just said that about an hour ago. Now we're down to number 1. Ultimately, it's been the one that is God. Thank you, Hashem, for the 90 years you gave to Daddy and for these 5 extra years you gave to us to keep him safe at home. We love you, Daddy. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Thank you, Alyssa. And now we're going to invite up David.
Right, so Grandpa is the patriarch of our family. The grandpa is always in charge. Grandpa has a seat of honor at the head of the dining room table for all our holiday dinners, whether leading the Passover Seder, where we all take turns reading from the Haggadah, and he would direct me to say the Monish Tanakh, until Philip came along and took my job. Erev Rosh Hashanah, my mom, siblings, and I would attend the fairly early TBS service in the small chapel, then go around the corner to my grandparents for dinner. We would join Mom and my grandparents at their seats during high holiday service at each synagogue, after our children's services let out. Grandpa is a great role model to teach us Jewish traditions and encouraged me, Jocelyn, and Philip with our bar and bat mitzvah studies. Grandpa was very handy, and he built wooden backdrops of a rainbow to go behind the ark cake for Jocelyn's Noah's Ark themed bat mitzvah, and helped Grandma build the styrofoam computer table markers with animal computer mice for my bar mitzvah, and also game show decorations, including an MC's podium for Philip's bar mitzvah. My family shares an interest in politics with Grandma and Grandpa. We learn from their example to value civic duty, be strong Democrats, vote in all elections, and become avid MSNBC watchers. We shared engaging political discussions and grueling nail-biting election returns. I bought them gifts of a variety of political books that flooded the market during these past few crazy years. I like to think that I inherited some of Grandpa's intellect and engineering ability, as Grandpa encouraged my early interest in computers. I would hear the stories of the wall-to-wall computers when Grandpa worked in operations research, and I recall discussing Fortran with him. Grandpa taught me to be generous with my time and money, as he was with his. He bought me my first laptop computer for my bar mitzvah, and then I bought Philip his bar mitzvah party. I built one of Grandma's first computers for her. The Grandpa didn't take to the computer as much as she did. I learned from Grandpa to pay it forward as I continue to help my alma mater, Drexel University, with their TechServe student group. They assist the local community with technology needs, and I assist my grandparents with their technology needs as well. Grandpa helped not only with generosity when easy, like writing a check, but when tough, like stepping up for tests not normally in his parameters. Grandpa helped take care of me and my sister Jocelyn when we lived with them for 2 months when Mom was in the hospital after she had Philip. Then Grandpa helped take care of Philip, who came to their house for a month when Mom was still in the hospital. My grandparents' house wasn't on our bus route for school, so Grandpa drove us not only to and from Bret Hart, but also to and from Bethel Hebrew School. Grandpa basically became Mr. Mom, taking care of us while Grandma was at the hospital to be with Mom while she was still sick. Grandpa, thank you for being you and for all you've done for us. We love you.
Thank you to Julie and to Alyssa and to David for sharing those words, those touching words about your father and your grandfather. In synagogue, as I mentioned earlier, we're currently reading from the book of Numbers. This fourth book of the Torah takes its name from the opening portions which present an ancient census of the Israelites. Numbers are important. They paint a picture. And as we gather together today to honor the life of Marvin Ames, Numbers helped to paint a picture of his life. He was married to his beloved Laura for almost 68 years. Together, they built a family, first with 2 daughters, Alyssa and Julie, and son-in-law Bob. Next came 5 grandchildren, Brian, Ashley, Jocelyn, David, and Philip. And finally, 2 adorable great-grandchildren, and they are truly adorable, Kayla and Kelsey. He was a successful corporate executive for dozens of years. He lived to the age of 90. All of these numbers do indeed paint a picture. However, numbers also have their limitations. There are stories behind the numbers. Julie, Alyssa, and David have already shared many of the stories and much of the biographical information of Marvin's life. But allow me to try to paint an even fuller picture through the words and memories that other family members, all of you, have shared with me. Marvin was born on May 29, 1932 in Brooklyn, New York. His parents were Samuel and Anna, and he had an older brother, Jerry, and a younger sister, Eleanor. They grew up in a traditional Jewish home, and Marvin attended Cooper Union Engineering, where he studied civil engineering and then went on to earn a master's degree at City College of New York. As Alyssa shared with us, Marvin went on to have a very successful career in engineering and ultimately as a corporate executive. He worked at Howard Needles Engineering, Sinclair Oil, Borden's Waltex Coated Fabrics, Borden's Cheese, and finally Whitman's Chocolates, serving as the vice president at both Borden's and Whitman's. His career took the family around the country as they lived in New York, Virginia, Columbus, Ohio, Wisconsin, and finally here in South Jersey. As Julie told me, Marvin was often happiest when he was working. And while he certainly worked hard, family was also most important to Marvin. And that began with his wife, Laura. Marvin met Laura while he was the president of his fraternity in college. Laura remembers the night they met and that he asked her out, as she told me, quote, "He came forward and he was a good conversationalist. He was very smart and he seemed to know everyone. I was very impressed by him from the beginning." While Marvin may have impressed Laura right away, it was Laura who was impressive in asking Marvin to marry her. When I asked her why she proposed to him, she said, quote, "Let me tell you something. If I hadn't said anything then, I would still be waiting." Thank goodness you proposed, Laura. You may have only been 19 and Marvin 22, but you were married on June 26, 1954, and as I said, enjoyed nearly 68 years of marriage together. Together, you developed a love for theater and dancing. In fact, as we heard, Marvin built a wooden dance floor in your basement so that you could dance all the time, and as you told me, you tangoed all over the place. Really, you tangoed the world together as you shared a love for traveling. You traveled to more places than I can name: Pompeii, Greece, Rome, Australia, many, many cruises, and more. And finally, you were builders. Yes, you built a life together, and you literally built several houses together. But most of all, you built a family. And the story of how your family began is quite unique. As Julie told me, Marvin was serving in the armed forces. It was peacetime, but they wanted to send him overseas. Marvin wanted to stay in the U.S., so he told the Army that Laura was pregnant. The only problem was, she wasn't pregnant. But Marvin knew that he had to make good on his word to not be sent overseas, and what do you know, soon enough, Laura was expecting. Julie was born, and then 2.5 years later, Alyssa. When I asked both of them about their father, they shared many of the same sentiments. They both remember Marvin being a good father throughout childhood, for being a good provider for the family, and for rolling with the punches and challenges that life threw his way. They also both shared, and as we heard, that they appreciated that their dad was there for them during difficult times. For Julie, it was an emergency procedure that she needed to have when she was a teenager. Marvin flew home from a business trip to be with her. Meanwhile, Alyssa told me that she's grateful to her dad for always bailing her out, As she said, Mom and Dad were always there for me throughout all of the crises of my life, when I was sick and needed help with the kids, and when I got divorced. When he had to, he did whatever was needed. Time and again, Marvin stepped up to the plate. Not just because he loved sports, but because he knew that is what family does. He stepped up to the plate in taking care of Jocelyn, David, and Philip when they were young, and he stepped up to the plate, as Julie told us, by opening his home, their home, to Bob, and then to Julie and young Brian and Ashley when they moved to South Jersey and were still looking for a home of their own. Marvin cared deeply about his grandchildren, and while each grandchild has had a different relationship with him, some closer than others, each had stories and memories to share. David already shared some beautiful reflections on what his grandfather meant to him. Let me add some words for the other grandchildren. Jocelyn told me that her grandfather was dedicated. When he decided to do something, he did it. She also remembers Grandpa and Grandma traveling the world and how much her grandfather loved to research about the places that they were about to visit. She recalls him sitting in their screened-in porch studying languages on a tape recorder in preparation for their travels. She also told me that having only recently moved back to New Jersey, she wished that she had the opportunity to spend more time with Marvin, but is grateful for the last few months that she got with him and she got to help with his care. Philip told me that he remembers his grandfather encouraging each grandchild to pursue their own particular interests while also introducing them to some of his own interests. He remembers spending time with Grandpa in the basement workshop, tinkering with wood, weights, and graphite as he assisted Philip in constructing his Pinewood Derby cars for Cub Scouts. He also remembers his grandfather encouraging him to earn his badges as a Boy Scout and then being present at TBS at the ceremony in which Philip became an Eagle Scout. Finally, Philip told me that he appreciated that his grandfather was always there to celebrate milestone achievements and graduations with the family, and he is grateful to have been able to help his grandfather over the last 5 years as his health declined. Similar to Philip, Brian remembers his grandfather attending both his and Ashley's graduations from college, and in recent years, Brian would visit his grandparents frequently. They would relax on the porch, and he would simply keep them company. Brian, that was a tremendous mitzvah, a tremendous act of kindness that you performed for your grandfather and your grandmother. And finally, Ashley's memories include visiting with her grandparents when she was young, and also now as an adult when she was in town to visit. He would tell stories about his life to her and her husband Ryan. He would also talk with her about painting, a hobby which she loves as well, perhaps a passion and a talent inherited from him, as Marvin also loved to paint, especially pictures of places where he and Laura traveled. And Ashley will also always remember her last visits with her grandfather when she walked in the door with Kayla and Kelsey, and the smile it brought to his face. First and foremost, Marvin loved his family, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention his other two loves, his Beagles and sports. He was a New York sports fan through and through, and his family remembers sitting in the box seats at Shea Stadium, season tickets at Riverfront Stadium, going to the 76ers games, and several trips to the U.S. Open, and more. We also heard about how Marvin played tennis well into his 70s, and other traits and values that defined Marvin according to his family. He was handy, deeply committed to education, always researching and seeking to learn more. He was generous, he made a mean margarita, and he was firm in his beliefs and both his likes and his dislikes. We could count up all these experiences and all the numbers, but the sum could never tell the full story of Marvin's life. The truth is that the book of Numbers is really much more than that. The fourth book of the Torah contains the story of a journey. It is the account of our ancestors' journey from humble beginning to a land of promise. And life, too, can be compared to a journey. Along the way, we learn and we grow. We have our triumphs, and we also have our difficulties and challenges. Marvin certainly encountered challenges and troubles during his lifetime. I know that your family has. Your relationship with him and with each other was not without conflict and disappointment. I hope, even amidst this tremendous loss, that this can be a time of healing, a time of taking account, not just of numbers, but of values and virtues, of hopes and goals moving forward. And in doing so, may you always count your memories of Marvin for a blessing, and may those memories of his life add to the fullness of your life's journeys for all the days to come. Please rise for memorial prayer. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Marvin Ames, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us all say, Amen. You may be seated. Immediately following the conclusion of our service here in the chapel, we will be driving to Preston Memorial Park where the interment will take place. Then following that, the family will be moving into Shiva, and they will be joining the TBS virtual evening minyan tonight on Zoom at 8 p.m. to recite Mourner's Kaddish, and then everyone is invited to stay online on Zoom afterwards for the sharing of more stories and memories.
Pallbearers, please step to the center aisle. And I'll ask if we can rise once more, please.
A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time for planting and a time for uprooting, a time for hurting and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up. A time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for crying and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time for shining embraces. A time for seeking and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for letting go, a time for reaping and a time for sowing, a time for speaking and a time for silence.
Richard, long time no see. Good to see you. I'll see you over the weekend.
Sure? How's it going?
You feeling better, obviously.
Yes.
Good.
First thing back was last Wednesday.
We missed you, actually. And I know you would.
I really.
Yeah, it's right over here.
I really
Everybody else.